Welcome to live and interactive public star parties. I'm going to show you how I moved in-person star parties online once we started to have the COVID crisis. I got hooked on astronomy when I was a young person and I saw a lunar eclipse. And like a lot of other people, I got aperture fever and I got larger and larger telescopes. But I always had a passion for sharing astronomy with others. So I hosted a lot of star parties in my backyard, and I put on star parties for summer camps where kids who'd not normally have a chance to look through a telescope got to see the heavens. I was able to share my passion with visitors to the U.S. national parks like the Grand Canyon and Bryce Canyon for a whole summer. And that was fantastic because I was able to show the daytime sun to thousands of people each week, in addition to doing nighttime constellation tours. In my backyard, my observatory started to get more and more light polluted. Here in Michigan, we have a lot of lights. So I decided to move my rig from Michigan all the way down to the U.S. Southwest desert near Mexico, where it is very dark. And so this is the observatory. It's a roll-off roof, and the telescope that's mine is on the left there. And this rig and the camera allowed me to take a lot of great pictures, and I got published in a lot of websites, and I sold pictures, and I was able to talk about the pictures on the radio. And this has been a lot of fun, but more recently I've enjoyed sharing my pictures with the public to use them as a vehicle for teaching astronomy. So I've put on 1-hour YouTube live sessions roughly once a month. So I use YouTube Live because YouTube is something that most everybody can get to pretty easily. And so I put them on about once a month. They each have a separate theme. Like I said, they last between an hour and an hour and a half, and each has a separate theme. So what I want to do is take you through a recent one, which was on Orion, the constellation of Orion, and all the cool things within Orion. When I do a session, I like to show them a drone video of the site in the desert where the telescopes are located. This is a telescope ranch, and the buildings each have several telescopes inside. I show them the roof opening, it slides to the side, and explain that we have to let the heat out when the sun goes down, otherwise there's too much heat inside. So since this session was on Orion, we talk about some mythology about Orion. And then we are on to controlling the telescope. So this is a simple go-to the Orion Nebula. We push the button, the telescope moves. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the telescope move on a 10-second delay. And so it's going to the Orion Nebula. I've set it up on the camera function right now to a 20-second exposure. And this is the program called Backyard EOS. And it's taking a 20-second exposure. And while the exposure is going on, I talk about what we're about to see, or maybe I'll answer a question from the chat function on YouTube. So now we've had a 20-second exposure, and we are now going to see the image, and we have a full frame of the Orion Nebula. So at this time, I'm talking about things like, okay, it's 1,400 light years away. And the light left there 1,400 years ago on its way here. And this is where stars are born, and especially in the bright section. And on the outer reaches, it's more of dust clouds. And so then we'll just talk more about that center part, which is so interesting. So we'll take another exposure, just focusing on that center part. Here's a 1-second exposure. And look, right in the center, there's a cluster of 4 stars, which were newly born. It's called the trapezium. So we're using the picture taking to explain the astronomical concepts. That's what I do. This is a picture of Orion, and this is how you can find the Orion Nebula tonight with your binoculars. And if you were able to take a 6 hours of exposure, you get something like this. You get the Orion Nebula next door to, on the left, the Running Man Nebula. Then, okay, let's take a picture of this Running Man Nebula. Here it is, 30-second shot. And okay, let's go to something else. Oh, the star Betelgeuse. It's a giant red star, a red giant star, and it is getting close to the end of its life, and astronomers believe that it might explode soon and become a supernova. So that's kind of exciting. Here's a picture of Betelgeuse. We can talk about how far away it is, things like that. Now let's take a picture of and move over to the Horsehead Nebula. This is a 30-second exposure of the Horsehead Nebula. You can see that it is a dark cloud that's in front of a red glowing cloud. There's a star close by that's very bright, and it illuminates a reflection nebula near it. Then we can see a longer exposure shot, a 6-hour shot of the Horsehead Nebula and a nice blue nebula. And here's an all-night video of the Orion Nebula going by with the full moon, and another video all night from the telescope and showing that Orion goes past it. We're seeing another birthplace of stars here called the Rosette Nebula, and I'm pointing out that these dark areas, those where the protostars are getting ready to be born, and these protostars are much easier to see on a longer exposure shot like this. But when stars die, like Betelgeuse, and they're big and they blow up like a supernova, they can leave behind something like this. This is the Crab Nebula, and this is from a supernova that happened about 1,000 years ago. But smaller stars die like this. It is a planetary nebula, and in this one is called the Eskimo. And finally, we had a request for a star cluster, and we have this cool double star cluster that I was showing people. And so that's how the session ends. One reason I think that I get a lot of good response to my online star parties is because the rig that I use is fast. So people don't lose interest because we're quickly whipping around the sky. The mount has fast slewing. It's able to go from one side of the sky to the other in about 3 seconds. The telescope that I have is a 10-inch Newtonian, and it's f5, so it gathers a lot of light quickly. The Canon camera is modified, so it picks up a lot of those nice red colors, the near IR. But most importantly, I use 30-second exposures. So in 30 seconds, I can get a good shot, and the public is not waiting around for too long. I want to finish up with just some do's and don'ts for those of you who might want to also do your own online virtual star parties. Focus on the astronomy, not the technology. I've seen way too many sessions where people are working with the technology and talking about the technology. It should be invisible. Moving along quickly is what I like to do. I only spend 2 or 3 minutes with every object, unless, of course, it's a showpiece like Andromeda or the Orion Nebula. So I move along quickly so people don't get bored. Interactivity is critical. And with YouTube, you have a chat function. People can type in what they want to ask you questions or give you comments or suggestions. And so that interactivity is great. And I always like to monitor the chat and pop in with answers throughout. It's great to tell a story. Recently, I did a whole session on the birth and the death of stars. So that is a story that you're telling, or a tour of the universe. You start close to Earth and you move way, way, way out into, and finally finish with quasars. Taking advantage of an upcoming sky event is huge. I had 5,000 viewers to one of my sessions that was last Christmas time because there was the Christmas star, which was a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. And everybody was talking about that on social media like Facebook. And so I had a built-in audience because it was a top-of-mind event. And lastly, keep it simple, make it fun. And finally, the don'ts. Don't let the technology come between you and the story. Like I said before, the technology should be invisible. Don't fiddle with the settings. It's tempting, but don't fiddle with settings because people just tune out. They'll start looking at their phones. They'll click to something else. So fiddling with settings is a no-no. Having glitches and delays, hey, it's unavoidable. But you know what? These 3 things can be minimized if you practice. Practice, practice, practice. Maybe it's controversial, but I don't think we should be using black and white images when we are doing star parties for the public. People are used to color. Their phone is color. Instagram's color. So it's better to be color. I don't use a lot of jargon. I like to use plain English, and so I don't say things like Bok globules or H2 regions. I like to say gas cloud. And don't be boring. I wear a silly hat so people can laugh at me, and we just have some fun, and it makes it a more enjoyable session for everybody. So thank you for your attention, and here's my email. I'm happy to answer any of your questions that you might have.